Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our latest Expert Insights webinar, the Clery Act, Improving Emergency Notification Processes. So today, we're going to be this webinar is going to be for a duration of 1 hour. My name is Michael Scott, and I will be your moderator. In addition to that, we will have two guest speakers from MIT, Suzanne Blake and Dr. Steve Goldman. For those of you new to GoToWebinar and our webinars, you can listen to this webinar by using the control panel on the right to expand your audio options. So if you'd like to listen via speakers or phone, you can do that there. In addition to that, if you have any questions during the webinar, whether it's technical or related to content, you can enter your questions in the GoToWebinar panel in the questions section. And just make sure you submit it to all panelists. In addition to that, the recording will be available within 24 hours along with the slides. So with that being said, let me introduce you to today's presenters. As I previously mentioned, I will be your moderator today. Our two main speakers, first up is Dr. Steve Goldman. He's a senior lecturer at MIT. He also is a partner with Steve Goldman Associates. He's an internationally recognized expert in consultant and business continuity, crisis management, disaster recovery, and crisis communication. Following Steve will be Suzanne Blake, manager at MIT Office of Emergency Management and Business Continuity. She is the manager of MIT's Office of Emergency Management and Business Continuity, as well as having over 15 years of experience in higher education emergency management and specialized in building emergency notification programs. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our first speaker. Steve, when you're ready, you may begin. Steve, you must still be on mute. We can't hear you yet.
There we go. Is my screen up there?
Yes. All
okay.
set, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So what we're going to go through today is just a caveat or two. I'll talk about MIT very briefly. Then we'll talk about the Clery Act and what it involves. Then we're going to discuss timely warnings and emergency notifications. Suzanne will take over and talk about emergency notification process requirements and best practices. And then Suzanne will talk about case study, one that just occurred last Sunday. We'll turn it back over to Mike. We'll talk about best practices for emergency notifications. We'll have a Q&A session, and then we expect a standing ovation from all of you sitting at your desks. Why can't I go forward here? There we go. Okay, the first caveat is you need to obtain the Handbook for Campus Safety and Security Reporting, the 2016 edition. There is the website. Please please go download it as soon as you can, because that's the crux of what we're talking about. As it says, it details the interpretation of the Clery Act and its safety and security requirements. Now, the caveat is that we are only going to discuss emergency notifications and not all the other additional safety and security requirements covered in the Handbook or the Clery Act itself. Okay, briefly talk about MIT. The campus was actually incorporated in Boston back in 1861. We moved to our current campus in Cambridge in 1916. You can read all the information about how big we are, the acres in the buildings. We actually have 26 acres of playing fields and 100 public works of art. This is a map that shows where we're located. It's the upper left, you'll see the city of Cambridge, and the lower right next to downtown Boston. So we are truly an urban campus that is spread out, as you can see. Now, what's neat about MIT is we have 11,000 students, and these are 2016 figures, but we have more grad students than we have undergrad, which makes us a little bit unusual. And you can read the numbers of employees and faculty, and we have close to 2,000 faculty and 11,000 students, so our student-faculty ratio is very good. There are actually 46 majors at MIT, 56 minor programs, and if you're good at archery, fencing, pistol, and sailing, yes, you can earn a pirate certificate. Of course, that is rated R. Now to get serious, let's talk about the Clery Act. The Clery Act had its origin in 1990 when the Crime Awareness and Campus Security Act was established, amending the Higher Education Act of 1965. The Crime Awareness and Campus Security Act was created after a student named Jean Clery was raped and murdered in the residence hall at Lehigh University in 1986. That act required higher education institutions that received federal funding to report crime statistics, notify campus community of threats, and compile and distribute an annual campus security report to the campus security, protective students, and employees. Now, in 1998, the act was further amended and renamed the Jean Clery Disclosure Act, as we call it, the Clery Act, in her memory. Now, importantly, in 2008, following the Virginia Tech shootings in 2007, the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008 reauthorized the Higher Education Act of 1965, and learning from the Virginia Tech, added learnings based upon the Virginia Tech incident. The amended version of the Clery Act includes new regulations related to emergency response, emergency notification, timely warnings, missing student notification, fire safety reporting, and hate crime reporting. Quite comprehensive. So again, in 2016, the Department of Education released the new Handbook for Campus Safety and Security Reporting. This details the Department of Education's interpretation of the 2008 version of the Clery Act and its safety and security requirements. And again, you really need to download this. Okay, let's talk about timely warnings versus emergency notifications. And the thing here is the Clery Act covers considerable additional topics regarding safety and security reporting. The emergency communications components, in other words, timely warning and emergency notification, are some of the most complex and concerning for institutions of higher learning nationwide. So therefore, Suzanne and I will discuss only the emergency communication requirements and not all the additional safety and security requirements covered in the handbook or the Clery Act itself. Now, under the Act, every institution, per the handbook, issue a timely warning for any Clery Act crime that represents an ongoing threat to the safety of students or employees, and then issue an emergency notification based upon the confirmation of a significant emergency or dangerous situation involving an immediate threat. So all those adjectives are in there to exactly define what's going on. So to make life a little easier, there is this table which describes the difference between timely warnings and emergency notifications. And as you can see, under the what, those are crimes for timely warnings, but for emergency notifications, those are significant emergency or a dangerous situation. Under the when, you send out a timely warning when there's enough information to adequately describe the threat. The emergency notification is sent immediately upon confirmation of the threat. So you can see the difference between the two. Now, the same modes or methods could be used for the timely warnings as with the emergency notifications, and some threats like an active shooter incident could fall into both categories. Now, this is where the paperwork is important. It's very important for compliance that you document everything you decide upon, especially your institution's specific conditions, like your geography, your specific procedures to issuing timely warnings and emergency notifications for adhering to the Clery Act. So the handbook advises you, do what you say and say what you do. So in this regard, each institution should create protocols and plans and procedures for implementing emergency notifications and timely warnings. Suzanne, turn it over to you.
Okay, and I'm going to show my screen here. Hold on. Okay. So now that Steve has outlined the Clery Act, we wanted to narrow down specifically into the emergency notification piece of it because it's very complicated and a lot of work has been done over the past 10 years since the amendments to the Higher Education Opportunity Act and Clery Act amendments came out. So I am going to go over emergency notification processes and procedures in 3 different categories. And as I've worked through the years with schools on their emergency notification programs and also with MIT on improving hours, I refer to these 3 sets of standards or practices. One is the actual specific language of the Clery law. The next is Emergency Management Accreditation Standards, or EMAP. And even if you're not looking for EMAP accreditation, which is something that emergency management programs can pursue, whether you're at the state, local, or higher education level, they do have good standards in there for communications and warning. So even if you're not looking for accreditation, they're good to refer to. And then also exemplary practices that we've all together formed over the years as we've tried to navigate this sort of newish field in higher education emergency management since the Virginia Tech incident. A lot of work had been done before that, but really the substantial amount of work in making these exemplary practices happened after that. So in one way, it's a very new field. In another way, we do have 10 solid years behind us, so exemplary practices have emerged. So the specific language of the law, and I would say if you can only do one thing to assess your program, I would look to the language of the law first. The caveat here, like Steve said, is there's a lot of nuances to these parts of the law that are described in the handbook, so also refer to that. But if you can take the actual quotes from the law and look at it and see if your program is addressed or partially addressed or not addressed, it's a really good start to figuring out where you need to address things in your program. So first is that you have a statement of your policies regarding emergency response and evacuation, and that also includes the use of electronic and cellular communication for your warnings if appropriate. So it actually spells out in the law specifically that you have electronic and cellular communication for your warnings. And that your policies will explain how you're going to immediately notify the campus community upon that confirmation of a significant emergency or dangerous situation, unless the notification will compromise efforts to contain the emergency. So that's one way you wouldn't have to send a notification, but that you have your policies that describe that you publicize those policies on an annual basis, and that you also test them. So if you can look at your program and see that you have that, or if you need to work on some of those pieces, that's a really good first start because you're actually referring to the language of the law. And that's always the first thing I go to. I also refer quite a bit to the EMAP standards because it's a very good accreditation program and kind of outlines all of the pieces you need in an emergency management program, including their communications and warning portion. So in that portion of the standards, they talk about your plans for communications and warning, and that they should outline exactly how you're going to initiate, receive, and relay warnings to first alert your key decision makers and your emergency personnel. So gathering those people together if we all need to respond to an emergency. And then second, how to disseminate emergency alerts to the public. So in your case, that would be the faculty, staff, and students at your institution. Delineating the decision-making process and the triggering incidents, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in the exemplary practices. And then also the plan is designed for your specific environment at your institution, so the specific hazards that you face and your community. And then, of course, that it's reviewed and updated on a regular basis, and that process is documented. Next, it talks about the emergency notification systems that you should have. So your system should provide you a means to communicate very reliably, and that means you need to have redundancy in place and alternate means to notify as well. Those systems are tested on a regular basis, and you also have the ability to notify vulnerable populations. So, for example, you have the ability to notify anyone who's hard of hearing, for example, and people with access and functional needs. Also, the procedures for actually operating the system are outlined in your plans, and your system, your tools, and your process. That should all be outlined in your plan. To get in a little bit more detail about the exemplary practices, and I'm going to cover a lot in these next few slides on the exemplary practices. Hopefully you won't fall asleep. If you do, I wanted to mention that we're going to put all of these practices and the EMAP standards and the letters, the language of the law into an assessment tool for you in the white paper. So hopefully you won't fall asleep, but if you do, it'll be all there in the white paper for you. So first of all, exemplary practices have emerged regarding the plan development and the process development. It's very important to have stakeholders across your campus work together on the program so that you can integrate the programs together. So for example, if we work with police on the process for sending a notification and it doesn't jive with what our news office is going to do in consulting and informing the media, then that's a problem. So we want to bring those stakeholders together to develop the program and the plan. We have to have the ability in our plans to disseminate emergency notification messages very rapidly, and our tools and systems can help with that. We'll talk about that in a second. Determined ahead of time the situations in which we would activate the system. So really sit down and decide, when are we going to activate this system? And you don't have to go through every single hazard under the sun, but triggering events that would make you move forward with putting the plan into action. And then with that, determining situations that will need emergency notifications and the ones that can take a little bit more time that might be in the timely warning category or something that is not necessarily relevant to your community and something that's not posing a threat to them, and maybe you don't need to inform them about using your emergency notification system. Also a change management procedure for your plan and how you revise it. For the authority and decision making, and I would argue this is probably the most important part of all of this, as far as the process, because you really need to figure this out or else the expediency of issuing your notifications will not work. So determine in advance, and I will emphasize in advance, who has the authority, one, to initiate the process, to approve messages, and then to broadcast the notifications. That all should be determined ahead of time so that you can do things very quickly in an emergency. That clear and streamlined decision-making process will make sure that you can get notifications out when you need to. And also with that, the authority and decision-making should be pushed down to the operations level or the response level, to the people who are finding out about the emergencies first. So that means that you're not calling your president or your VP or your legal department to get approval on pushing out a notification message. You've already done that ahead of time. You've already had their approval so that the people who are finding out about the emergency first are authorized to send the message without that approval in the moment. And with that, the messages should originate from a trusted campus authority for safety. So that might be your police department if you have one on campus. It might be emergency management. It might be some other department on campus, but something, a place that the community is really going to trust that they need to follow directions from this source and that the information is going to be accurate and timely. Of course, tools and technologies can help us with all of this and make things much faster in sending out notifications. And so we've learned to rely on these tools and technologies. We do want to have a suite of them so that we have redundancy in times that they may malfunction or not work. And a lot of this means that we have a text alert database. So text messaging has received probably the most attention since the Virginia Tech incident as far as a tool for notification. And it is definitely a good tool. You want to have others as well to supplement that, but it is a very good tool for notifying, especially because most people use text messaging now as a communications tool. But it's nice to also have a system in place that allows you for choosing appropriate modes depending on the emergency. So it may be appropriate to send all modes for a very serious emergency. It may be not appropriate to use all of the modes depending on the situation. So it's nice to have a system for choosing your appropriate modes. The scope of notifications, a system that allows for dissemination to as much of the community as possible. So we really want to get everyone's attention across the entire campus community if it really is a life safety issue. So something, tools and technologies that allow for that. It really helps. I know this is politically sensitive sometimes and it's tough to do at times, and MIT is actually an opt-in program right now, but the best practice is that it's an opt-out or enrollment is mandatory in the emergency notification program, and people are sort of automatically enrolled and then they have to physically opt out. We're moving in that direction, but right now we have an opt-in program. The ability to send notifications to smaller groups. So we have that in that we can send a notification to our Emergency Operations Center team or our Crisis Decision team, our policy group, so that if we need to gather those smaller groups, we can use our systems and tools to send out notifications to the smaller responder groups as well. Also, methods to notify the temporary community members like contractors and visitors. This is a challenge we constantly face at MIT because we don't have solid borders of our campus and we're right in the city. We have actually tour buses full of visitors come every single day. It's always a challenge to know how we would notify them in an emergency. We use things like digital signage boards across campus. We can't have a siren, but I know some people do at their institutions, but some way that you can notify people without having them sign up for your emergency notification system is definitely a best practice. And then also communicating with the external community. We allow the external community to sign up for our emergency notification system, and that's a little bit different than most institutions across the U.S., but Our neighbors are so close to us, and also we allow parents to sign up for it. That's a decision you have to make internally. But if you don't allow them to sign up, then you'll want other ways to communicate with them and educate them about those ways. So you might be putting information out on social media or a website, and you want to direct your external community there so that they can find out what is going on if they're in harm's way as well or nearby. As far as messaging, having clear, concise messaging in both audible and written messages, because you'll be sending things out on text message or emails, as well as through voicemail, and making sure they contain the appropriate and useful information that the community needs. Pre-scripted messages are often good to speed up this process. We only have one pre-scripted message, and it's incident at location instructions. We don't like to get too detailed as far as every single hazard we could face, because we could be here all year long thinking of all the different specific hazards, and there's many nuances to the emergencies that come our way. So we use that very simple pre-scripted message, but it does help when we are trying to write a message on the fly to have that, that pre-scripted message in our head. And then also a process to quickly send follow-up messages. So everything that you do as part of your emergency notification process should be geared around getting out that initial notification message very quickly. But your community is going to be expecting follow-up messages very soon after that. So yes, getting that information out quickly, that initial message is so important, but the ability to then send follow-up messages or refer them to another place to get information is equally as important. Access and implementation, since you could use the powers for good as well as evil. If you have access to your emergency notification system, you want to make sure the appropriate security measures are in place to protect your system, such as logins or keeping it in a secure area, if it's like a siren activation or something like that, authenticated logins, things like that, to make sure that only the right people can access it and send out emergency notifications. False alarms are not good for the community and cause a lot of undue stress. And then also giving your users and operators of the systems the environment in which enables them to succeed. So that could mean, you know, a dispatch center, but it could also mean just providing the tools and equipment to your staff that are part of this process. So I have 3 staff members. I realize I'm very lucky in that regard, but they are all part of our emergency notification system, and we're all on call at different times. So in order to make sure that they feel like they can do that and they can be part of our emergency notification system, we've provided them with laptops that are very light, Wi-Fi hotspots, and they're required to carry them around as long as they're on campus and then after work when they're on call. So they are given the tools they need to actually be successful in this program, and that's what we mean by providing them with an environment that allows for the effective and expedient operation of the system. And then, of course, any individuals that are involved in the process, we have to give them the appropriate and regular training. And these systems, you know, they're very easy to forget how to press this button or that button or this piece of the procedure. So we like to have full monthly drills of our team and give everyone different opportunities to practice operating the systems. We also have our users in the systems practice once a week to do system checks. And that goes right into the next slide about testing, training, and education. So a frequent but reasonable schedule for testing and exercising the tools and the processes. Our once a month drill is geared around a scenario, and it allows everyone to practice the process from start to finish. We don't send the message out to the whole community. We send it just to our internal team, but it allows us to go through a scenario and practice it all the steps of the way. The weekly tests that we do are done by our MIT police, and they are simply testing for the effectiveness of the tools and technologies to make sure they're all working. And sometimes those tools and technologies have updates, and so getting into them once a week allows us to see any changes that have been made from the system end. And then I always say that half of a successful emergency notification practice and program is the process and the tools and technology, but the other half is the education and outreach to your community. Because your emergency notification system is not going to work at all if your community has no idea what it is, they don't know what to do when they get a notice, and they don't know when they're going to get a notice. So having that education and outreach program to your university community about the program, what to expect, and how to respond when they get a message is equally as important as having the tools and the systems and the plans and procedures in place. Finally integrating into emergency management and your safety program. So the ability to integrate your emergency notification into the first responder operations and process is very, very important. I always try to educate people on our campus that emergency managers are not first responders. We're not running to the scene. We're not fighting fires. We're not doing any of that. But our only first response responsibility is sending the MIT alert and doing emergency notification. So because of that, we have to be extremely integrated into what our police are doing, our EMS, our Cambridge Fire and Cambridge Police, and they all have to know what we're doing for our process for emergency notification so that it's not unexpected when they receive an alert. We can get the information we need from them to actually send an accurate alert, things like that. So we have to seamlessly integrate into the first responder process, into their operations. And we've tried to do that here at MIT. And beyond that, we want to integrate seamlessly into the rest of our crisis communications program. So, for example, interacting with the media, we seamlessly integrate with our MIT News and how they share information with the media and external public. And any other social media that we're putting out there, we all have to be giving the same message, and so we have to integrate into each other's plans. And of course, the emergency notification program is a huge part of our emergency management program as a whole, and they inform each other quite a bit as far as what other plans and procedures we need, what are we thinking about in terms of strategies, long-term solutions, tools, technologies, everything that we're doing, and they both inform each other. So having it as part of that bigger program is very important. So I'll get into a case study here at MIT. I'm first going to discuss our emergency notification program and the basics of it, and then I'll get into an incident that we actually had on Sunday. I was going to give you another case study, but since we just had one where we sent an MIT alert, I thought I'd talk about that. I will give you a caveat here that I won't say that we do everything perfectly. This is just what we've come up with that works best for MIT. We're always tweaking it. We're always having lessons learned. And it might not be good for your institution what we do because you are a very different place. So this is what we do. I won't say it's perfect, but it does work for us right now at this point in time for our institution. This is our policy statement. You don't have to read the whole thing, but we do want to have a policy statement for when we send MIT alerts so that we can get that education and outreach piece out there to our campus community of when they're going to receive an MIT alert. The important pieces are in red. So it's an immediate threat to the life, safety, and health of our community and requires them to take actions to stay safe. So we always say we don't send them for football games, we don't send them for road closures. It's really when you need to pay attention. We're not going to bother you with anything from MIT Alert unless you absolutely have to pay attention. So we really try to educate our community in that way so that they understand that if they get an alert, it's really important. We also had to add something to our policy statement after last winter because we had quite a few snow closures and our community was expecting to get text messages, but snow closure didn't meet the criteria of immediate threat to life, safety, and health. We got so much feedback from our community that we decided to add, also we would use MIT Alert for anything that causes a major disruption to our operations. So that would include a campus closure for any reason, snow or anything else, or something like a power outage where maybe it wasn't immediately life-threatening, but a lot of people would need to know about it and it would cause a major disruption. So we added that to our policy. And then we also say that we will always send an all-clear message once the campus is safe again. So we don't want people nervous for 8 hours or thinking they have to hide in their office for 8 hours or anything like that. We want to make sure they know when the emergency is over. So we educate them that, if you get an initial message, you'll always get an all clear. And if they haven't gotten one yet, then we haven't been able to make the campus safe again. Along with what we do for MIT Alert, which is these top two up here for life-threatening and major disruptions, I also wanted to mention our other emergency public information categories, which are advisory and informational. And I'll go through all four of these in a little bit more detail. So again, I know a lot of words on the page here, but we've really tried to narrow down exactly why we would send an MIT Alert and what would trigger our process. We have 4 hazards that would be considered life-threatening. One is an active shooter or violent intruder. One is a tornado warning for the MIT campus. We do indeed get tornadoes up here sometimes in Massachusetts, although I'm sure many of you on the call get them a lot more than we do. We also have many, many hazardous materials on our campus, so there is a possibility for a severe hazardous materials incident. And then we have this sort of nebulous fourth category for anything else we determine is a significant emergency or dangerous situation. And that could be any number of things. We've gotten emergencies that we couldn't have even dreamed of before. So we definitely have that as a fourth category. Our template is there, our prescriptive message, incident at location with instructions. We typically will send people to our website for more information than we can fit into 140 characters, and then we'll have more detail there. For anything that's life-threatening, we use all modes, so text message, voicemail, et cetera, all of our social media, and our websites, so that everyone that's in the system will get it. The major disruptions, like I said, would be closures, snow or otherwise, widespread power outage, anything else we determine as a major disruption. And we would describe the specifics of the disruption. We would use all modes with an addition of 2 that we would not have time to use in a life-threatening situation, and that would be our hotline and local media. So for closures, we do update those, but there's not time in the life-threatening to do that. The 2 other categories of emergency information would be an advisory. So these are things like emergencies that are happening in Cambridge that aren't necessarily impacting our campus, but people might want to know about if they're headed off campus. Emergencies at surrounding institutions, regional, national, international emergencies that people are curious about, or weather notices that are not immediately life-threatening, like tornado warning would be. So typically we'll use our social media for this. We also may put something on our emergency website, and depending on the situation, we could send an all-campus email, but we don't do those very disruptive modes for the advisories. It's really people who are seeking the information, not that we need to actually push the information to them. And here we really try to quote authoritative sources. So if it's a Cambridge emergency, we will retweet or requote what Cambridge Police is saying about it. If it's a weather emergency, we will take language exactly from the National Weather Service and put it out there. So that, you know, typically we're not the owners of these emergencies, so we want to take what the people in charge are saying about them and get it out to our community. And then the fourth is just informational. So anytime we're getting out preparedness tips or awareness, training that we're offering, events like the flu clinic, and this is where we really use social media as well as our departmental website, which we're redoing right now. So if you go there, don't take it as an example of a good website quite yet, but maybe in the next few months. So I'll walk you through our process very briefly. First, an incident occurs. MIT police, they're usually the ones that find out about it first, so they'll evaluate the incident. If it's an active shooter, they push the message immediately to our community because it's so time sensitive. If it's a tornado warning, I might find out about it first through our warning tools that we have, and I may push something immediately. Or similarly, in a hazmat incident, we might do the same thing if we find out about it through MIT police directly. But if it's not any of those things, specifically if it's not an active shooter, MIT police will activate the emergency notification team through our Everbridge conference call system. So it pushes out a phone number, it calls us, we just answer the phone, and we're immediately connected all together on the line. Typically, MIT police will brief us about the emergency. Our office leads the call, one of us leads the call, and one of us is the sender of the emergency notifications. We can have one person doing both those things if absolutely necessary, but we like to have at least 2 of us on the call. We will determine the criteria to send an alert, and this is where we bring in our other emergency notification team members. If it's not super straightforward, like the active shooter, tornado warning, or severe hazmat incident, it might require a little bit of discussion. And I'm not talking about like an hour's long worth of discussion here. I'm talking like very quickly, you know, do we have information from EHS about the specific material that was spilled, you know, and how hazardous is it? Or do we have information from MIT Medical about the specific effects that this emergency might have on human health? Things like that, that we can get quick information. We also typically have some people that are on the scene who call into this call, specifically our facilities fire engineers, who are typically on anything that Cambridge Fire responds to. So we can get some really good intelligence about the emergency, which typically elevates it to if we have to send an alert or not. So if it does meet our criteria, we'll send the alert, and that's our responsibility through our tools and technologies. We may use discretion on the modes. If it doesn't meet the criteria, we may not send an alert, but we'll continue to monitor the situation, and we may keep the team activated or activate it again if the situation elevates. Also, a really critical part of our team is our MIT News office. You all might have your university communications office or your marketing office. that's similar to MIT News, they will take over updating the website for us so that they have the finesse with the language and they can get out more information on there than we can in the 140 characters. So we just worry about sending the alert and then they can put the more information on the website. So that's been really helpful to have that relationship. We remain on the call until the all clear is given, and then we will send an all clear to our systems, and then MIT News typically will update the emergency.mit.net. If it's a really severe emergency, we also have a banner on our homepage that they can activate. We can activate it as well as a backup, but they can activate it too to make it a little more quicker. These are the folks that are on our emergency notification team. Our office leads the call and sends the notices. We get all of the emergency information from our police sergeant on duty and our police command staff. MIT News, they help us update the website and the homepage. And then we have some SMEs and support staff that would chime in based on the specifics of the emergency. Most of the people on this team stay silent for the most part. There's just a few of us trying to get the message out as quickly as possible, and we give training to our team that, you know, speak up if you have to, but just make sure we can get those messages out quickly, and everybody has come together really well as part of this team. Over to the right there is a screenshot of the text message that we get from Everbridge for joining the conference call. It also gives us a phone call, so if we're on text, we can just press the number and join, or if we get the phone call, we can answer it and join in, and it's really easy to gather everybody together. This is a table of the EMT activations we've had since I joined MIT in December of 2015. So we really try to tell the community, you know, it's not going to be that many alerts. And two of these activations we decided not to send alerts because they were very Cambridge-specific emergencies and they weren't affecting our population. The telecommunications outages you see there, it may not seem immediately like that's a life-threatening emergency, but the problem was that our line into MIT police was out, so we had to tell everyone to call 911. So it could have been life-threatening if they didn't know that, which is why we would send an alert. And as you'll see, most of them have at least two because it's the initial message and the all-clear message. Some of them have more where we've given information in between the first and last notifications, but it's really not that many. And you know, we have had a lot of practice, unfortunately, but it's not so many that we feel like it's going to be bothering people, hopefully. So we really try to use that strict criteria of when we send one. And that last one that was on the list, the shooting that we had on Sunday. So there's an event that takes place every year here. It's called the Cambridge Carnival. We also refer to it as the Caribbean Festival. It's a wonderful event. There's a parade. People dress up in their costumes and their colorful costumes and floats. And they have a parade down one of the main streets in Cambridge that actually runs right through our campus. So in the past, there have been occasional acts of violence at this festival. So what we've decided to do in the past several years is that we stage our staff at the Cambridge Police Command Post, at the Cambridge Police Headquarters in Cambridge. And it's their event. It's hosted by the City of Cambridge, and so we follow their lead, but we do provide staff. So it brings in approximately 50,000 people, runs from about noon to 7, and there's a parade in there and then music and a stage and vendors and all sorts of things. And we send MIT Police, my office, and information systems and technology representatives. They operate our camera system, so they provide visual intelligence for the event using our cameras. And we all sit in the Cambridge Police Headquarters command post. We also have MIT Police details on scene that are helping Cambridge Police. So we are ready in case anything happens. And unfortunately, this past Sunday, we did have something. Last year, nothing happened. This year, approximately 4:44 p.m., we heard shots fired on the radio, and we heard all the police officers responding. We also saw it on the cameras, the visual that we had. We saw them all headed to the scene. So immediately when I heard shots fired, I pulled up our system. I had a pre-scripted message in place specifically for this event in case something happened, and all of the modes were prepared, all the text was prepared. All I had to do was wait for confirmation and then approval from the incident commander to send the initial message. So I prepared the message. Our police captain who was in with us, he coordinated with the incident commander really, really quickly, and 4 minutes later, I received approval from the incident commander and was able to send out the initial message. Now, you'll notice that I did not activate the emergency notification team for this, and we had a drill last Wednesday that specifically went over this scenario with our emergency notification team, and we all agreed that the process would be that since I was sitting there in the command post, I would send the initial message to get it out as quickly as possible, and then I would activate the team. So they were expecting to get a message if something happened before the team was activated, and they knew that that might happen. And they knew to be kind of on the lookout for any messages so that they could call into the conference line. The text message I have there on the right is exactly what we sent out for the initial notice. And we had the incident, we had the location, and we had instructions to stay clear of the area, and if nearby, shelter indoors. I did not reference the website because I had not had time to update the website yet, but I knew in the next message that we would have done that. So I did not include that in the initial message. I then activated the emergency notification team via Everbridge, and we all got on the line. I, at the same time, was posting information to the website so that our community would have additional information on the website if they went to it, even though I hadn't referred to it yet. And I briefed the emergency notification team, and then we all decided that we needed to send an additional message a few minutes later via all modes because I was getting intelligence from our being in the command post that they had a suspect in custody. The folks operating the cameras confirmed that it was the same person that was seen at the shooting and then running away, and they did get that person, so we confirmed that the suspect was in custody, and we wanted to let our population know it was not an all clear yet, but we did have a suspect in custody. At this point, I had turned over updating the website to MIT News, which was super helpful because then I could concentrate on sending the alerts, and they were doing that for me. We sent a third message when we almost had an all clear, but not quite, but we wanted to get out as much information to alleviate fears as possible, make sure people weren't stuck in their dorm rooms or offices. I know it was a Sunday, but people at MIT work a lot on the weekends, so we wanted to send out an additional message a few minutes later that no ongoing threat believed to exist. Again, we weren't 100% sure, so we had to wait for that confirmation to do the all clear, but we did send something to alleviate some fears with more information on the website. We finally received the all clear at 5:54 and sent an all clear message, as you can see there on the right. And we updated the website accordingly, and then we deactivated our team at 6 p.m. So all in all, the incident took about an hour. We were on the conference call that whole time. It seems like a long time, and it was a long time, but it was really helpful to all be there and all making sure we were all informed and providing information. I was also doing a lot of social media monitoring from the command post. We have 3 social media accounts that we push our alerts to, and it's both on Twitter and Facebook. We have MIT Prepared that does a lot for our advisory type stuff and our day-to-day stuff. We have MIT Alert that's simply for alerts, and then MIT Police also has accounts that they post regularly on, and we've connected our systems to their social media. So this is a screenshot of our MIT Alert account. Again, I was retweeting from Cambridge Police as much as possible because they really had the up-to-date, accurate information from their social media person, so and who's also their PIO. So I was retweeting from them, but our alerts are there as well. We were also trying to do rumor control. So I was looking to see if anyone had posted about an MIT shooter or MIT shooting, and this person was in Canada, but was from some news organization in Canada. And notice they said MIT shooter suspect. And to me, that meant they were saying that the shooter was associated with MIT, that it was an MIT shooting. And so I really wanted to clarify that the incident was not associated with MIT, it was just nearby, just to get that rumor control out there. In the meantime, national news had already picked this up within minutes. So the Washington Post, which is not even in our area, obviously, it's down in Washington, D.C., had already posted an article from the Associated Press about this shooting. And I was very, very careful in issuing the alerts. The language that I used, instead of shooter, I used a shooting. So it would be an isolated shooting, targeted act of violence, instead of anyone being able to make it into an active shooter situation, because that can cause a lot of problems. So luckily they did, all of this information in this article is directly from the alerts I sent. They were getting it from the MIT police social media. That's when they say MIT police say the shooting was this time and they did this. That was all from the alerts that I was sending, and so that's why we had to be so careful with the language that we used. They mostly got it right, except for a few things on social media that we had to clear up for rumor control. Everything was fine, but just to go to show you, within minutes it was out on national media, and it was not even, you know, that serious of an incident, not to minimize the two victims that were shot, and they were fine. They were taken to the hospital, and they were fine, but it did get out on national news. So I'll be the first to tell you that our program is not perfect. It works for us right now, but we have a lot of next steps to improve it. We're moving from opt-in to opt-out, like I said. We're also implementing a civilian dispatch center. Right now we have police dispatchers who also have to serve as part of the police and the duties there. So we're bringing in additional telecommunications professionals to help us with dispatch. The reason why our initial message went out within 4 minutes on Sunday was because I was physically sitting in the command post, and that doesn't happen all the time. But with civilian dispatchers, it will be a lot faster if we can train them on how to issue that initial message that's so important. So we're hoping to do that. We're going to continue to have monthly drills as usual, but we're trying to change the timing. It's, you know, every first Wednesday at 9 a.m. and everybody knows that, so we're going to try to do some surprise drills at night and things like that, and swapping some roles. My team always swaps roles, but we want to make sure everybody is interchangeable. The emergency notification team, we'd like to bring them together in person. We always are on the phone together, but we want to do an in-person training just as a refresher. We're constantly evaluating that team as well. A lot of times it seems like we have too many people. Sometimes it seems like we don't have enough people. So we're always kind of reevaluating it and saying, do we need this person? Do we need this office? Should we add some people? Should we, you know, change our procedures to make sure it's more streamlined? It's an ongoing process, as well as evaluating our entire program. We're always making tweaks. We learn something every month during our drills, and we're always trying to make it a little bit better all the time. We also want to do a really big push with our education and outreach program with all emergency preparedness, but especially MIT Alert, because people are really curious about it and want to know about it. So this is a poster that we made for the 3 options people have to respond to an emergency. And then there's that communication bar at the top that talks about MIT Alert and our website, which we really want to push people to that website. So I will turn it back over to Steve for summary and conclusion. Thanks for bearing with me on all of that information. Like I said, it'll be spelled out a little more clearly in the white paper.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. Very good presentation. Okay, so to summarize, basically there's a carrot and a stick, and the carrot is this is the right thing to do. Following the Clery Act, making your program comply is the right thing to do. The stick, of course, is lack of compliance can result in hefty fines, plus damage to your institution's reputation. In fact, in 2016, a major university was hit with a $2.4 million fine for not meeting Clery requirements. So again, the Act has very strict requirements for timely warnings and emergency notifications that must be met in order to avoid these types of consequences. Okay, as Susan said, in the last 10 years, higher education institutions have done a lot of work on their emergency notification programs. And this is great. What this means is the good practices exist. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. Contact the university, contact Suzanne, contact me, and we can work together on this. Have reliable, tested, and user-friendly tools and technologies in place to aid the process. You don't want people learning how to do this when the real event occurs. So do the training and get the tools and technologies in there. And again, as Suzanne said, and I repeat, this works for us, but we're always fine-tuning it and tweaking it. So what works for one institution may not work for another. So use the exemplary practices, but adapt it to your unique needs and situations. And finally, of course, there are nuances to just about everything discussed in the webinar, and it's all addressed in the handbook. So again, obtain, read, and understand the handbook. This is where Everbridge is kind enough to allow us to plug our business crisis management and business continuity professional education course. Our 9th year will be next year. We just finished one in June, July this past summer. There's the website. Come on down to Cambridge and we'll see you in the campus next summer. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mike talk about best practices for emergency notifications. Mike?
Thank you, Steve. Let me just get the slide up, and there we go. One second, everyone. There we go. Perfect. All right. So thank you, Steve, and thank you, Suzanne, for your wonderful presentation. So I know everyone's waiting to get to the Q&A. We got quite a few questions in, so I'll go through this pretty briefly. Today we're talking about the Clery Act and emergency notifications, and we're going to focus on that during my presentation. But also just consider in the back of your mind some of the other incidents that you guys face in addition to an emergency event such as an active shooter or severe weather like the hurricanes that were going through Florida and Texas these past few weeks. Think about some operational incidents too that your campus can benefit from, leveraging some of these best practices for emergency notifications, such as, an IT incident or Wi-Fi outage, those types of things. Keep those in the back of your head. So with that being said, let's dive into how to be prepared for these critical emergency incidents. Not to oversimplify it, but let's break it down to 4 parts. Ultimately, when you have these types of incidents, your main goal is to, get the most information, the most accurate information, as much details as possible, and as quickly as possible, because ultimately, simultaneously, you're going to need to coordinate your response teams while informing your campus community during these emergency scenarios, whether it's an active shooter or severe weather event. So with that, to keep students, faculty, and your community safe while keeping your campus running, you really need to give students and faculty time to react. Obviously, speed and accuracy come into a factor or come into play. So with your notification system as a best practice, automate the process when possible. You don't know when or if a certain scenario is going to happen to you. However, you do know there are certain procedures that you're going to need to follow, certain groups that you're going to need to message, certain messages you're going to need to send out. Try to eliminate as many variables as possible in that notification process. When doing that, in addition, make sure if available in your notification system, send location-specific alerts across as many contact paths as possible so you can ensure that you're reaching everyone not only as quickly as possible, but as efficiently as possible. And this is a really good feature to have, whether you're using Everbridge or another solution. Make sure you're using it, because imagine having a scenario such as an active shooter or a campus protest that's centralized to a certain location. You want to make sure people in that part of your campus are getting specific notifications versus people outside that area. You want people outside that area avoiding it or at least aware of it, and people inside it, you want to be able to give them instructions of what they should be doing and what authorities are doing. And in addition to that, beyond just your traditional contact paths, such as email, SMS, sirens, share through as many channels as possible when the events call for it. And what I mean by that is, if your system allows, also integrate with your social channels, deliver messages through that, so people who aren't opted in, whether they opted out or just never signed up or aren't part of your immediate campus community, but have a vested interest, that way they're aware, there's a higher likelihood that they'll be aware of the situation at hand. Also, you want to minimize the impact to your campus. So make sure you're communicating on an ongoing basis, and that's where, with Everbridge, you can set up these templates to make sure that they're sending out notifications as the event progresses. So, as Suzanne had talked about during her use case, don't just send out the initial message and leave people hanging. Make sure you let them know that you're going to be updating them throughout the incident when, a building is closed and when it's reopened, for example. In addition to that, make sure if your system allows that you are able to integrate with different systems so you can identify who's on call and who has a specific skill set for a specific incident automatically. So you're not having to go through and see, who can handle this situation, who can't, who's on call, who's not, who's on campus. make sure you can integrate with your HR, your student databases, things like that, your scheduling databases, so you know your system knows automatically who to notify and who to not notify. So very quickly, I want to go over who Everbridge is for those of you unfamiliar with us. You know, we're an enterprise software application with ultimately the goal of keeping people safe and businesses running. You know, we're used for a wide variety of critical events, from severe incidents, as I'd mentioned before, severe weather or active shooter, but also to you know, more operational issues like, you know, a cyber security threat on campus, an IT outage, a Wi-Fi outage, something like that, and then the business world, a product recall. We're leveraged for those type of events as well, and we're used across multiple industries. In fact, we have over 3,200 enterprise customers from, you know, 8 of the largest U.S. Cities to 24 of the 25 business North American airports to over 220 education institutions across North America. So with that, I know I went through that pretty quickly, but I know I'm having a couple of questions come in regarding Everbridge. If you would like to have a rep follow up with you, or us to follow up via email or a call, and provide a little more information of how we help MIT and other education institutions, feel free to fill out yes. I'm going to launch the poll right now. And what it's going to ask is, are you interested in learning more about the Everbridge solution? Either identify yes or no. I'll give you guys about 30 seconds, and then we'll move on to our Q&A. While you're filling that out, just as a reminder, this session is recorded, and the slides and recording will be delivered to you, all registrants, whether you attended or not, within 24 hours. So keep an eye out for that within the next day or so. And if you don't receive it, you can always go onto our website and view this session or any of our other past webinars under our resources tab. So give us another 15, 20 seconds, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. So sit tight. Thank you. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to close the poll. Thank you for everyone who filled that out. We'll definitely make sure, for those of you who are interested in some more information, we will follow up with you after the webinar within the next few days. With that, we're going to move to our Q&A. So before I get started, just as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so by selecting the questions dropdown in the GoToWebinar panel and submitting your questions to all panelists. So our first question, let's pull this up. So the first question for you, Suzanne, is from Jim in the audience. He wants to know, do you send alerts before you validate? Who are typical stakeholders to be involved in developing the plan other than the usual cast? For example, police, fire, physical plan, executive.
So the first part of the question, do we send it before we validate? I'm assuming that means before we confirm. We do not send a message until we have confirmation of an incident, and we map out in our protocols what confirmation exactly means. So for an active shooter, for example, it's either first responders confirm it, or it's multiple calls to dispatch with the same information. So that could serve as confirmation as well. And that's enough for our MIT police to push the active shooter message as soon as they have it confirmed. For other emergencies, yes, we wait until there's confirmation. We had one example where there was a report of someone who had a long gun firearm in an area near campus that's very heavily populated, and police responded, and it turned out that someone was assembling a clarinet. So we would not have wanted to issue a notification for that until it was confirmed, and that's exactly why we have confirmation. There's also a lot of malfeasance out there where people will report an emergency that's not true, so that we will issue a notification and cause a lot of stress and harm to the community. So that's another reason why we want to make sure the emergency is confirmed. On the second part of your question, so we have our emergency notification team, the folks that I listed on that slide. They are part of the process of at least vetting our procedures and helping us develop them. The main players are our office, MIT Police, and MIT News, because we're the main communicators. But we have others put input into it as well. And we also have an EOC team that is wonderful and is made up of people across campus in many different departments. We have monthly meetings of that team, and we present to them everything that we're working on. So although we don't, have them read the protocol right there in the meeting, we present it, we ask them what they think, and that is a really good way to get feedback from the general population, because although they're on the EOC, they're part of the general population of our community as well. So we present everything to them and get their feedback. Also, every time we issue an alert, we go over it at the EOC meeting and say why we sent it, what happened, all those things, and we get a lot of really good feedback that way too. Some people are like, you should have sent an alert for that, or some people are like, I don't know why you sent an alert for that. And even if we don't necessarily change the procedures, sometimes we do, we always take that into account so that we can give feedback to the rest of our community as far as why we sent an alert or why we didn't in certain situations.
Thank you, Suzanne. The next question I'll take, it's from Jack in the audience. He wants to know, Mike, you went over you mentioned automating the process with incident templates. How does Everbridge help organizations do that? So, Jack, with Everbridge, what we actually do with our incident templates, or rather allow you to do, is build out the entire incident scenario. So, like I'd mentioned, while you don't know when or if the situation is going to occur, you do know that you're going to have to follow certain processes and notify certain parties. So, for example, for some executives within the university, you might have to just make them aware that, hey, you're sending out this is the type of notification that's sent out, and just give them some variable information of the time it was sent and location. So instead of having to draft that message up completely, you could have that message template along with some other ones already pre-drafted with some variable fields within it that you could fill out in a shorthand form through our software, and have that group already identified and built out within your solution, so you don't have to go into your solution and manually select them or manually call them like without a solution. In addition to that, simultaneously, you can be sending out a message to your campus. So you're the main part of the incident, the actual what's at hand and the people you want to notify, the responders, and your campus community. You can be sending out 2 other simultaneous messages, letting your campus community know, hey, this incident's happening at location X. Here's what we want you to do. Simultaneously to your responders, hey, this is happening. We need you to respond here. Here's what you need to do and be aware of. And at the same time, for that response group, what it's going to be doing within our solution, once you set up integrations with your internal databases, is it's going to identify, for example, who's on call, as I mentioned, who has the right skill set, who's supposed to be involved in these types of situations. So as you can tell, instead of you having to go through one step at a time for a certain incident, you can automate the process through all those steps can be taken care of all at once, versus having to prolong the response and coordination efforts. So for the next question, I'll take this one too, and then we'll move on to a couple more for Suzanne. They want to know if Everbridge actually has pre-built templates that they sell. So we do. We have 2 options. We do have some pre-built templates based off different common scenarios. However, we also have a professional services team that can help any of our customers build out any types of templates they need. So feel free to reach out to me, and I can definitely point you in the right direction with your account manager or one of our professional service representatives. So our next question for you, Suzanne, and this will actually be the last question given our time. How often do you recommend running drills, and is this required by the Clery Act?
So the requirement is that you test your emergency response and evacuation procedures on at least a regular basis. So again, it's really fuzzy about how often you should do it, but you should go into the handbook and look at this, because there's some interesting language about if an event, if an actual incident counts versus a test. And for a lot of them, you cannot count an actual incident as your regular testing. So that's something to keep in mind. We choose to have, like I said, the monthly drills, and we've found that really helpful. I think at first we thought we'd only do that for a little while until we got things pretty wired, but we found that it's so helpful. We just want to keep it going. And we would like to have more regular full tests of the system where we're sending information out to all of our campus community, and we hope to have that once a semester. But yeah, again, the language in the law is up to interpretation, and that's where we'd want you to refer to the handbook, but it's definitely required that you do at least some training and exercising with your systems and your process. I would recommend the monthly drills to play out the whole process, but you might not be able to do that, and if you can do it as often as possible. We also like to carry things out into more of a tabletop setting as well with some of the scenarios that we use, and that's always fun and interesting also to carry it out to more to a bigger exercise with more people.
Awesome. Thank you, Suzanne. So with that being said, we're going to conclude the webinar. We will follow up with any questions that weren't answered given our time. But with that said, I want to thank everyone who joined us today, and of course, thank our speakers, Suzanne and Steve, for another great presentation on the Clery Act. Everyone have a great day. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Bye.